In the frozen heart of Alaska, where history holds its breath, two leaders meet today to wrestle with the fate of a war-torn nation. Will their words forge peace or fracture the world further? The summit between U.S. President Donald Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin, held on August 15, 2025 at Joint Base Elmendorf-Richardson in Anchorage, Alaska, represents a critical juncture in addressing the Russia-Ukraine war, a conflict that has raged for over 3 years, leaving a trail of devastation across Eastern Europe. This meeting, set against the stark backdrop of a military base in the Alaskan wilderness, is not a routine diplomatic engagement, but a high-stakes endeavor to confront one of the most intractable geopolitical crises of our time. The war, sparked by Russia's invasion in February 2022, has claimed tens of thousands of lives, displaced millions, and upended global energy and food markets, while testing the cohesion of Western alliances. The human toll, shattered cities, families torn apart, and a generation scarred by violence underscores the urgency of finding a path to peace, even as the prospects remain fraught with complexity. Trump, returning to the global stage with his characteristic blend of boldness and unpredictability, has framed this summit as a listening exercise, a chance to probe Putin's intentions and explore the contours of a potential ceasefire. The choice of Anchorage, a symbolically neutral yet unmistakably American venue, signals an intent to project strength while engaging in dialogue. The agenda is ambitious, with discussions expected to cover not only the immediate goal of halting hostilities, but also broader issues like arms control and economic cooperation, including hints of a new nuclear deal. Yet, the weight of history looms large. This is the first US-Russia summit since 2021 and Putin's first visit to American soil in a decade, recalling their contentious 2018 Helsinki encounter. The stakes are amplified by the war's ripple effects, NATO's reinvigoration, Europe's rearmament, and the deepening divide between Moscow and the West. The summit's outcome could reshape the trajectory of the conflict, but it faces immediate hurdles. Putin's demands. Ukraine's cession of 4 regions, recognition of Crimea as Russian, and an abandonment of NATO aspirations are non-starters for Kyiv. Meanwhile, Trump's floated idea of land swaps has sparked alarm, hinting at a willingness to entertain territorial compromises that could undermine Ukraine's sovereignty. The absence of Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy from the table further complicates the dialogue, as any deal without Ukraine's consent risks being seen as a betrayal by Kyiv and its European allies. The world watches, knowing that the decisions made in Anchorage could either inch us toward peace or deepen the fissures of a fractured global order. President Donald Trump's approach to the August 15, 2025 summit with Russian President Vladimir Putin in Anchorage, Alaska, hinges on his characterization of the meeting as a listening exercise, a strategic framing that reflects both his deal-making persona and the delicate tightrope of diplomacy he must navigate. The Russia-Ukraine war, now in its 4th year, has left a trail of destruction, with Ukraine's cities battered and millions displaced, making the pursuit of a ceasefire an urgent priority. Trump's stated goal is to probe Putin's intentions, seeking to understand Russia's bottom line while laying the groundwork for a potential pause in hostilities. This approach aligns with his broader foreign policy style, bold, direct, and often improvisational, aiming to break through the stalemate that has defied previous diplomatic efforts. The summit, held at Joint Base Elmendorf-Richardson, is not just about immediate de-escalation, but also about testing whether personal rapport between the two leaders can unlock progress where multilateral talks have faltered. The ceasefire focus is ambitious yet fraught with challenges. Trump has publicly emphasized the need to halt the fighting, warning of severe consequences like sanctions and tariffs if Russia does not comply. This rhetoric underscores his intent to project strength, but the specifics of a ceasefire remain murky. The war's complexity, marked by Russia's occupation of Ukrainian territories, relentless missile strikes, and Kyiv's unyielding resistance, means that any pause would require concessions that neither side has shown willingness to make. Trump's team, including high-profile figures like J.D. Vance and Marco Rubio, is tasked with fleshing out what a deal might look like, potentially involving temporary halts in fighting or demilitarized zones. Yet, the absence of Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy from the summit raises immediate questions about the legitimacy of any agreement. Ukraine insists it must be a central player in negotiations, and Trump's suggestion of land swaps has already stirred unease. hinting at territorial compromises that could alienate Kyiv and its European backers. Beyond the immediate goal, Trump's listening exercise opens the door to broader discussions, including arms control and economic ties, with Putin hinting at a new nuclear deal. This expansive agenda reflects Trump's belief in high-stakes leader-to-leader diplomacy to reshape global dynamics. However, the risk is palpable. Missteps could embolden Russia or strain U.S. alliances, particularly with Europe, which remains steadfast in supporting Ukraine's sovereignty. The summit's success depends on whether Trump can translate his listening into tangible steps that respect the war's brutal realities while advancing peace. The absence of Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy from the August 15, 2025 Trump-Putin summit in Anchorage, Alaska, casts a significant shadow over the proceedings, raising critical questions about the legitimacy and viability of any potential peace agreement for the Russia-Ukraine war. Ukraine, as the nation enduring the brunt of Russia's aggression since February 2022, has borne an immense toll. Cities reduced to rubble, millions displaced, and a resilient population fighting for its survival. Zelenskyy has been unequivocal in his stance. Any decisions about Ukraine's future made without its direct involvement are fundamentally flawed, describing such efforts as stillborn. This position reflects Ukraine's fierce commitment to its sovereignty and territorial integrity, principles that have galvanized its resistance and earned global admiration. The exclusion of Kyiv from this high-profile summit where U.S. President Donald Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin discuss a possible ceasefire risks undermining the very foundation of a just resolution. The war's stakes make Ukraine's absence particularly contentious. Russia's demands cession of Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson, recognition of Crimea as Russian, and Ukraine's abandonment of NATO aspirations strike at the heart of Ukraine's independence. Zelensky's government has rejected these terms outright, viewing them as existential threats to the nation's existence. For Ukraine, any negotiation must prioritize its right to self-determination, a principle echoed by European allies who insist that Kyiv's voice is indispensable. The summit structure, with Trump framing it as a listening exercise to probe Putin's intentions, suggests a bilateral approach that sidesteps Ukraine's agency. This has sparked alarm in Kyiv, where leaders fear that discussions, particularly Trump's mention of land swaps, could pressure Ukraine into concessions that betray its sacrifices. The idea of territorial compromises, even if exploratory, has already drawn sharp criticism from Ukrainian officials who see it as a dangerous precedent that could embolden Russia further. European leaders closely aligned with Ukraine share these concerns, emphasizing that no agreement can hold without Kyiv's consent. The summit's optics, two global powers deliberating Ukraine's fate, evoke historical parallels to negotiations that sidelined smaller nations, fueling distrust among allies. Zelensky's absence underscores a broader challenge balancing superpower diplomacy with respect for Ukraine's hard-fought agency. The war has reshaped global alliances, with NATO and the EU rallying behind Kyiv, and any misstep in Anchorage could strain these partnerships. Ukraine's exclusion risks not only alienating its leadership, but also galvanizing domestic and international opposition, complicating the path to a sustainable peace. President Donald Trump's suggestion of land swaps as a potential component of a ceasefire in the Russia-Ukraine war has ignited a firestorm of concern in Ukraine and among its European allies, casting a shadow over the August 15, 2025 summit with Russian President Vladimir Putin in Anchorage, Alaska. The Russia-Ukraine conflict, now stretching into its fourth year, has left Ukraine's infrastructure decimated, its people displaced, and its sovereignty under relentless assault. Trump's floated proposal, introduced as part of his broader push for a peace deal, implies the possibility of territorial concessions, where Ukraine might cede control of contested regions like Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporizhia, or Kherson in exchange for other territories or guarantees. This idea, though vague, has been met with immediate alarm in Kyiv, where leaders view any suggestion of relinquishing land as a betrayal of Ukraine's fierce resistance and a direct challenge to its territorial integrity, a principle at the core of its national identity. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy has been unequivocal, rejecting any deal that compromises Ukraine's borders and insisting that negotiations without Kyiv's involvement lack legitimacy. The war has cost Ukraine dearly, tens of thousands of lives, shattered cities, and an economy under siege, making the notion of ceding territory particularly galling. European allies, including leaders from France, Germany, and the United Kingdom echo this sentiment, emphasizing that Ukraine's sovereignty must remain non-negotiable. They fear that land swaps could embolden Russia, rewarding its aggression and setting a precedent for further territorial demands. The proposal also risks undermining the unity of NATO and the European Union, which have rallied behind Ukraine with military and economic aid, viewing its fight as a bulwark against autocratic expansionism. The controversy surrounding land swaps is amplified by the summit's high stakes. Trump's framing of the meeting as a listening exercise suggests flexibility, but the mere mention of territorial adjustments has sparked protests in Ukraine and criticism from European capitals. Critics argue that such a proposal, even if exploratory, overlooks the war's human toll and the moral imperative to support Ukraine's self-determination. For many, the idea evokes historical deals that carved up nations without their consent, fueling distrust in US intentions. As Trump and Putin discuss ceasefire terms, the specter of land swaps looms as a divisive flashpoint, threatening to alienate Ukraine and its supporters while complicating the path to a just and sustainable resolution. Russian President Vladimir Putin arrives at the August 15, 2025 summit with US President Donald Trump in Anchorage, Alaska, armed with a set of demands that encapsulate Russia's unyielding stance in the Russia-Ukraine war, now in its fourth year of unrelenting conflict. These demands: Ukraine's cession of Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporizhzhia, and Kherson, formal recognition of Crimea as Russian territory, and Ukraine's complete abandonment of its aspirations to join NATO, form the cornerstone of Moscow's negotiating position. They reflect Putin's broader strategic goal of reasserting Russian influence over its neighbor and reshaping the post-Cold War security architecture in Europe. For Ukraine, these terms are not just unacceptable, but existential, striking at the heart of its sovereignty and identity as a nation fighting for survival against Russian aggression. The war has already claimed countless lives, leveled cities like Mariupol, and displaced millions, making Russia's insistence on territorial and political concessions a non-starter for Kiev. Ukraine's rejection of these demands is rooted in both principle and pragmatism. Ceding the four eastern and southern regions, which Russia partially occupies, would legitimize Moscow's military gains and reward its violation of international law. Recognizing Crimea, annexed by Russia in 2014, as Russian would further erode Ukraine's territorial integrity, a red line for President Volodymyr Zelenskyy and his government. The demand to forswear NATO membership is equally contentious, as Ukraine views NATO as a critical shield against future Russian incursions. Zelenskyy has framed these conditions as an assault on Ukraine's right to self-determination, a stance echoed by the Ukrainian people, who have endured years of sacrifice to defend their homeland. The resilience of Ukraine's resistance, bolstered by Western military aid, has made it clear that Kyiv will not capitulate to terms that undermine its independence. The summit's dynamics are further complicated by Putin's demands, which clash with Trump's push for a ceasefire and his controversial suggestion of land swaps. European allies aligned with Ukraine view Russia's conditions as a non-negotiable overreach, warning that any agreement leaning toward Moscow's terms could destabilize the region and weaken NATO's unity. For Putin, these demands are a test of Western resolve, leveraging Russia's battlefield presence to extract maximum concessions. The Anchorage talks, while an opportunity for dialogue, face the daunting challenge of bridging this chasm, as Ukraine's defiance and Russia's intransigence leave little room for compromise. The August 15, 2025 summit between US President Donald Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin in Anchorage, Alaska, carries profound implications for the Russia-Ukraine war and the broader landscape of global geopolitics, with the potential to either advance peace or exacerbate tensions among international alliances. The war, now over 3 years long, has reshaped global security, galvanizing NATO, straining energy markets, and testing the unity of Western democracies, supporting Ukraine's fight against Russian aggression. Trump's decision to engage Putin directly, framed as a listening exercise, risks legitimizing Russia's actions in the eyes of critics, particularly if the talks entertain Moscow's demands for Ukrainian territorial concessions or a halt to Kyiv's NATO aspirations. Such an outcome could embolden authoritarian regimes worldwide, signaling that military aggression might yield diplomatic rewards. thus weakening the international norms that have underpinned post-World War II stability. The summit's bilateral nature, excluding Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy, has already sparked unease in Kiev and European capitals. Ukraine insists that no agreement can hold without its involvement, a view echoed by allies like France, Germany, and the United Kingdom, who fear that Trump's floated land swaps could pressure Ukraine into ceding territory, undermining its sovereignty. This risks straining US relations with NATO and the European Union, which have rallied behind Ukraine with billions in aid and sanctions against Russia. A perceived tilt toward Moscow could erode trust in US leadership, particularly if allies see the summit as prioritizing deal-making over principles like territorial integrity. European leaders have stressed that Ukraine's agency is non-negotiable, and any misstep in Anchorage could fracture the transatlantic unity that has been a cornerstone of the West's response to the war. Beyond Ukraine, the summit's outcomes could reshape US-Russia relations, potentially opening discussions on arms control or economic cooperation, as hinted by Putin's mention of a new nuclear deal. However, these broader ambitions carry risks, as concessions to Russia could alienate allies and embolden Putin's regional ambitions. The talks also hold domestic implications for Trump, whose base may applaud his bold diplomacy, but critics, including pro-Ukrainian groups protesting in Anchorage, warn of appeasement. The summit's global ripple effects hinge on whether it can balance pragmatic dialogue with the moral imperative to support Ukraine, all while navigating the delicate web of alliances that define the current world order. The urgent call for a principled peace process in the Russia-Ukraine war, as emphasized in the context of the August 15, 2025 Trump-Putin summit in Anchorage, Alaska, underscores the need for any resolution to prioritize Ukraine's sacrifices and sovereignty while fostering a lasting end to a conflict that has ravaged the nation for over 3 years. The war has left Ukraine's cities in ruins, displaced millions, and claimed countless lives, with its people demonstrating extraordinary resilience against Russian aggression. And just peace, as demanded by Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy and echoed by European allies, must center Ukraine's right to self-determination, ensuring that its territorial integrity and independence are not bartered away in negotiations. The summit, framed by President Donald Trump as a listening exercise to explore ceasefire possibilities with Russian President Vladimir Putin, risks undermining this principle if it leans toward Moscow's demands, such as ceding Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporizhia, Kherson, or recognizing Crimea as Russian. Terms Ukraine categorically rejects. The moral weight of Ukraine's struggle demands that any peace process respects the sacrifices of its people, who have endured relentless bombardment and occupation while defending their homeland. European leaders, including those from France, Germany, and the United Kingdom, have insisted that Ukraine's inclusion in negotiations is non-negotiable, warning that agreements made without Kiev's consent lack legitimacy and could destabilize the region. Trump's controversial suggestion of land swaps has heightened these concerns, as territorial concessions would not only betray Ukraine's fight, but also risk emboldening Russia's expansionist ambitions. A principled peace requires a framework that upholds international law, rejects rewarding aggression, and ensures Ukraine's agency in shaping its future, including its pursuit of NATO membership as a safeguard against further threats. The summit's high stakes amplify the need for a resolution that is not merely a temporary pause, but a durable solution grounded in justice. Pro-Ukrainian protests in Anchorage and skepticism from European allies reflect the global demand for a process that honors Ukraine's resilience rather than compromising it for diplomatic expediency. The challenge lies in balancing Trump's deal-making instincts with the imperative to maintain solidarity with Ukraine and its supporters, ensuring that any ceasefire or agreement strengthens rather than fractures the global commitment to sovereignty and freedom. A peace that fails to reflect these principles risks being hollow, leaving Ukraine vulnerable and the world order further strained. The urgent call for a principled peace process in the Russia-Ukraine war, as emphasized in the context of the August 15, 2025 Trump-Putin summit in Anchorage, Alaska, underscores the need for any resolution to prioritize Ukraine's sacrifices and sovereignty while fostering a lasting end to a conflict that has ravaged the nation for over 3 years. The war has left Ukraine's cities in ruins, displaced millions, and claimed countless lives, with its people demonstrating extraordinary resilience against Russian aggression. A just peace, as demanded by Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy and echoed by European allies, must center Ukraine's right to self-determination, ensuring that its territorial integrity and independence are not bartered away in negotiations. The summit, framed by President Donald Trump as a listening exercise to explore ceasefire possibilities with Russian President Vladimir Putin, risks undermining this principle if it leans toward Moscow's demands, such as ceding Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporizhzhia, Kherson, or recognizing Crimea as Russian, terms Ukraine categorically rejects. The moral weight of Ukraine's struggle demands that any peace process respects the sacrifices of its people, who have endured relentless bombardment and occupation while defending their homeland. European leaders, including those from France, Germany, and the United Kingdom, have insisted that Ukraine's inclusion in negotiations is non-negotiable, warning that agreements made without Kyiv's consent lack legitimacy and could destabilize the region. Trump's controversial suggestion of land swaps has heightened these concerns, as territorial concessions would not only betray Ukraine's fight, but also risk emboldening Russia's expansionist ambitions. A principled peace requires a framework that upholds international law, rejects rewarding aggression, and ensures Ukraine's agency in shaping its future, including its pursuit of NATO membership as a safeguard against further threats. The summit's high stakes amplify the need for a resolution that is not merely a temporary pause, but a durable solution grounded in justice. Pro-Ukrainian protests in Anchorage and skepticism from European allies reflect the global demand for a process that honors Ukraine's resilience rather than compromising it for diplomatic expediency. The challenge lies in balancing Trump's deal-making instincts with the imperative to maintain solidarity with Ukraine and its supporters, ensuring that any ceasefire or agreement strengthens rather than fractures the global commitment to sovereignty and freedom. A peace that fails to reflect these principles risks being hollow, leaving Ukraine vulnerable and the world order further strained. As the Anchorage summit unfolds, the world stands at a precipice. The choices made here must honor Ukraine's resilience, uphold justice, and forge a peace that endures, ensuring that hope, not division, defines this historic moment.